Hey, how's it going, guys? We're in the home stretch. This is the last one. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to be a little quiet because my kids just went to bed and I don't want to wake them up. So let's get this over with. Yeah. One chapter down. Only 10 more to go. It'll be fine. I don't think we actually have 10 more chapters. I think it's more like 7. I think it's 7. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Point. We just got to cognitive dissonance theory, classic version. All right. So for those of you who actually have the book, we're on page 248. For those of you who have the online version, it's 6-3b, cognitive dissonance theory, the classic version. Okay, so let's power through this, guys. I want to get done in less than an hour. I know, wishful thinking. Anyway, many social psychologists believe that people are strongly motivated by a desire for cognitive consistency, a state of mind in which one's beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors are compatible with each other. Highlight. Cognitive consistency and its definition. Boom. Cognitive consistency theories seem to presuppose that people are generally logical. However, Leon Festinger in 1957 turned this assumption on its head. Struck by the irrationalities of human behavior, Festinger proposed cognitive dissonance theory, which states that a powerful motive to maintain cognitive consistency can give rise to irrational, sometimes maladaptive behavior. All highlight. According to Festinger, all of us hold many cognitions about ourselves, the world around us. These cognitions include everything we know about our own beliefs, attitudes, and behavior. Although generally our cognitions coexist peacefully, at times they clash. Consider some examples. You say you're on a diet, yet you just dove headfirst into a tub of chocolate ice cream. Or you waited in line for hours to get into a concert, and then, bam, was disappointing. Or you baked for hours under the hot summer sun while listening to music, even though you knew the health risks. Each of these scenarios harbors inconsistency and conflict. You've committed yourself to a course of action, yet you realize that the action is inconsistent with your attitude. Under certain conditions, discrepancies such as these can evoke an unpleasant state of tension, known as cognitive dissonance. But discrepancy doesn't always produce dissonance. Hold on, before we get into that paragraph, I think I'm going to highlight all of us hold many cognitions about ourselves and the world around us. They include everything we know about our beliefs, attitudes, and behavior. Discrepancies can evoke an unpleasant state of tension known as cognitive dissonance, but discrepancy doesn't always produce dissonance. Okay. If you broke a diet for a Thanksgiving family dinner, your indiscretion would not lead you to experience dissonance. Or if you mistakenly thought the ice cream you ate was frozen yogurt, only to find out the truth later, then again, you would not experience much dissonance. What hurts is the knowledge that you've committed yourself to an attitude discrepant behavior freely and with some knowledge of the consequences. When that happens, dissonance is aroused and you become motivated to reduce it. Okay, what hurts is knowledge. And when that happens, you become motivated to reduce it. Like in Table 6.4, many ways to reduce dissonance. Changing your attitude, changing your perception of the behavior, add consonant cognitions like chocolate ice cream is very nutritious. Have you ever heard somebody say that, like, oh, French fries are a vegetable, so they count for my vegetable portion? um, Minimize the importance of the conflict. That's kind of a minimization too. Reduce perceived choice. Yeah, those all make sense. There are many ways to reduce dissonance. For example, you can rationalize that others in your group are also hypocrites. I'm not alone. The whole world is full of hypocrites. You can deny personal responsibility for behavior. Oh, I wasn't, I'm not in charge. I mean, if anything, it's my boss who should have stepped in if it wasn't okay. Um, or trivialize the issue in question. It's not even that big of a deal. It's a lipstick that she stole. I mean, it's a single little lipstick. Of course, sometimes the easiest way to reduce dissonance is to change your attitude to bring it in line with your behavior. You know what? I don't think it's really that important. Like, I lost 5 pounds, so do I really need to lose the extra 7? I don't think so. Right from the start, cognitive dissonance theory captured the imagination of social psychology. Festinger's basic proposition is simple, yet its implications are far reaching. In this section, we examine 3 research areas that demonstrate the breadth of what dissonance theory has to say about attitude change. Oh, sorry. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm going to highlight each of these techniques above, whether all 5 in the table. I think they're going to be important. All right, so justifying attitude, discrepant behavior. When doing is believing is the next section. Imagine for a moment you're a participant in the classic study by Leon Festinger and J. Merrill Carlsmith in 1959. As soon as you arrive, you're greeted by an experimenter who says that he's interested in various measures of performance. Wondering what that means, you all too quickly find out. The experimenter hands you a wooden board containing 48 square pegs in square holes and asks you to turn each peg a quarter turn to the left, then a quarter turn back to the right, then back to the left, then back again to the right. The routine seems endless. After 30 minutes, the experimenter comes to your rescue. Or does he? Just when you think things are looking up, he hands you another board, another assignment. For the next half hour, you take 12 spools of thread off the board, then put them back, then take them off, then put them back again. By now, you're just about ready to tear your hair out. As you think back over what better times, even the first task begins to look good. Finally, you're done. After one of the longest hours of your life, the experimenter lets you in on a secret. There's more to this experiment that meets the eye. You were in the control group. To test the effects of motivation on performance, other participants are being told that the experiment will be fun and exciting. You don't realize it, but you are now being set up for the critical part of the study. Would you be willing to tell the next participant that the experiment is enjoyable? As you hem and haw, the experimenter offers to pay you for your services. Some participants are offered $1, others are offered $20. In either case, you agree to help out. Before you know it, you find yourself in the waiting room trying to dupe an unsuspecting fellow student who's really a Confederate. Though this elaborate staged presentation, participants were goaded into an attitude discrepant behavior. Did this conflict arouse cognitive dissonance? Depends on how much the participants are paid. Suppose you were one of the lucky ones offered $20 for your assistance. By today's standards, that payment would be worth about $80. Surely a sufficient justification experienced little, if any, dissonance. But wait, suppose you were paid only $1. Surely your integrity is worth more than that, don't you think? In this instance, you have insufficient justification for going along. So you need a way to cope. Insufficient justification, a condition in which people freely perform an attitude discrepant behavior without receiving a large reward. Important. I think I'm also going to highlight that sentence. Did this conflict arouse cognitive dissonance? It depends on how much they were paid. Okay. In this instance, you have insufficient justification for going along, so you need a way to cope. According to Festinger in 1957, unless you can deny your actions, which is not usually possible, you'll feel pressured to change your attitude about the task. If you can convince yourself that the experiment wasn't that bad, then saying it was interesting is all right. The results were, as Festinger and Carl Smith had predicted, when the experiment was presumably over, participants were asked how they felt about the pegboard tasks. Those in the control group who did not mislead a Confederate openly admitted that the tasks were boring. So did those in the $20 condition who had ample justification for what they did. Money. However, participants who were paid only $1 rated the experiment as somewhat enjoyable. Having engaged in an attitude discrepant act without sufficient justification, participants reduce their cognitive dissonance by changing their attitude. I think that's a hugely important sentence right there. The results can be seen in 612, the dissonance classic. Okay, two aspects of this classic study are noteworthy. First, it showed the phenomenon of self-persuasion. Highlight. When people behave in ways that contradict their attitudes, they sometimes go on to change those attitudes without exposure to a persuasive communication. The second I'm going to have to highlight that too. The second major contribution of Festinger and Carl Smith's results is that they contradicted the time-honored belief that big rewards produce greater change. Contradicted the time-honored belief that rewards produce greater change. In fact, the more money participants were offered for their inconsistent behavior, the more justified they felt and less likely they were to change their attitudes. Such a small reward provides insufficient justification for attitude discrepant behavior. Mild punishment is insufficient deterrence for attitude discrepant non-behavior. Okay, that's another key term. A condition in which people refrain from engaging in a desirable activity, even when only a mild punishment is threatened. So they're essentially saying a very small punishment is not enough deterrence for an attitude discrepant non-behavior. Think about it. What happens when people refrain from doing something they really want to do? Do they devalue the activity and convince themselves, oh, they never really wanted to do it in the first place? In one study, children were prohibited from playing with an attractive toy by being threatened with a mild or severe punishment. All participants refrained. As cognitive dissonance theory predicts, however, only those faced with a mild punishment, an insufficient deterrent, later showed disdain for the forbidden toy. Those who confronted the threat of severe punishment did not. Once again, cognitive dissonance theory turned common sense on its head. The less severe the threatened punishment, the greater the attitude change produced. I'm going to highlight that sentence, and I think the one from the study. Only those faced with a mild punishment, an insufficient deterrent, later show disdain for the forbidden toy. And I think mild punishment is insufficient for an attitude discrepant non-behavior. Okay, so now justifying effort, coming to like what we suffer for. Oh, I love this section. Okay, have you ever spent tons of money or tried really hard to achieve something only to discover later that it wasn't worth all the effort? This kind of inconsistency between effort and outcome can arouse cognitive dissonance and motivate a change of heart towards the unsatisfying outcome. The hypothesis is simple but profound. We alter our attitudes to justify our suffering. Yep, that's getting highlighted. In a classic test of this hypothesis, Elliot Aronson and Judson Mills in 1959 invited female students to take part in group discussions about sex. But there was a hitch because sex is a sensitive topic. Participants were told that they would have to pass an embarrassment test before joining the group. The test consisted of reading sexual material aloud in front of a male experimenter. Okay. One group of participants experienced what amounted to a severe initiation in which they had to recite obscene words and lurid passages taken from paperback novels. A second group underwent a mild initiation in which they read a list of more ordinary words pertaining to sex. The third group was admitted to discussions without an initiation test. Moments later, all participants were given headphones to eavesdrop on the group they would soon be joining. Actually, what they heard was a tape-recorded discussion about secondary sex behavior in lower animals. It was dreadfully boring. When it was over, participants were asked to rate how much they liked the group members and their discussion. Keep in mind, what dissonance theory predicts, that the more time, the more money, the more effort that you choose to invest in something, then the more anxious you will feel if the outcome disappoints. One way to cope with this inconsistency is to alter your attitude, and that's exactly what happened. Participants who had endured severe initiation rated the discussion of the group more favorably than those who had endured little or no initiation at all. I'm going to highlight that sentence right there. Social embarrassment is not the only kind of effort we feel we need to justify to ourselves. As a general rule, the more you pay for something, whether you pay in physical exertion, pain, time, or money, the more you will come to like it. I'm highlighting that too. That seems critical, that whole sentence. This principle has provocative implications for hazing practices in fraternities and sororities, on sports teams, and in the military. Research even suggests that the harder psychotherapy patients have to work at their own treatment, the more likely they are to feel better when the treatment is over. No pain, no gain. All right, this next section is called Justifying Difficult Decisions, when good choices get even better. Whenever we make difficult decisions, whether to marry, what school to attend, where to live, or what job to take, we feel dissonance. By definition, a decision is difficult when alternative courses of action are about equally desirable. Marriage offers comfort and stability. Staying single enables us to seek out exciting new relationships. One job might pay more money, and another may offer more interesting work. Once people make tough decisions like these, they're at risk because as negative aspects of the chosen alternatives and positive aspects of the unchosen alternatives are at odds with their decisions. In economics, I don't know if anybody's taken economics yet, but in economics, we call that the opportunity cost. If I choose this over this, then what is the cost of having chosen this? The cost will be what I don't get from this. And in most economic choices, you're taught in economics to choose the choice that has the least cost to it. So you're not just gaining something, you're also losing the potential of this choice, this opportunity. And that has a cost that needs to be evaluated before every decision. And this is what they're talking about. You're not just choosing between the good and the good, you're also choosing between the bad of not having it. Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to go down an economics rabbit hole, but I love that it relates so directly to this. Okay, anyway. According to dissonance theory, people rationalize whatever they decide by exaggerating the positive features of the chosen alternative and the negative features of the unchosen alternative. In an early, I'm going to highlight that. We highlight the good of what we're choosing and the bad of what we're not choosing. In an early test of this hypothesis, Jack Brem in 1956 asked female participants to evaluate various consumer products, presumably as part of a marketing research project. After rating a toaster, a coffee pot, and other products, participants were told that they could take one home as a gift. In the high dissonance condition, they were offered a difficult choice between two items they found equally attractive. In the low dissonance group, they were offered an easier choice between a desirable and an undesirable item. After receiving the gift, participants read a few research reports and then reevaluated all the products. The results provided strong support for dissonance theory. In the low dissonance group, the participants' their post-decision ratings were about the same as their pre-decision ratings. But in the high dissonance condition, ratings increased for the chosen item and decreased for the item not chosen. Torn between two equivalent alternatives, participants coped by reassuring themselves that they had made the right choice. This pattern appears in a wide range of settings. Robert Knox and James Inskter in 1968 took dissonance theory to the racetrack and found that bettors who had already placed $2 bets on a horse were more optimistic about winning than those who were still standing in line. This type of optimism may even begin to set in once a thoughtful decision has been made, even before the bet is placed. Similarly, Dennis Reagan and Martin Kilduff in 1988 visited several polling stations on election day and found that voters were more likely to think that their candidates would win when they were interviewed after submitting their ballots than when they were interviewed before they submitted them. Since bets and votes cannot be taken back, people who had committed to a decision were motivated to reduce post-decision dissonance. So they convinced themselves that the decision they made was right. I like that. I'm going to highlight that because every other paragraph has already said that. People who had committed a decision were motivated to reduce post-decision dissonance. That's a fancier way of saying it. Okay, so this next section is called Cognitive Dissonance Theory, a new look. We looked at the classical, now this is the new. Following in Festinger's bold footsteps, generations of social psychologists have studied and refined the basic theory. Nobody disputes the fact that when people are gently coaxed into performing an attitude discrepant behavior, they often go on to change their attitudes. In fact, people will feel discomfort and change their attitudes when they disagree with others in a group, or even just observe inconsistent behavior from others with whom they identify, a process of vicarious dissonance. That's a term. Even just observing inconsistent behavior from others whom they identify with is vicarious dissonance. All right. Researchers have also examined possible perceptual consequences of cognitive dissonance. In one study, Emily Balketis and David Dunning in 2007 took college students to the crowded center of campus and asked them to put on and walk around in a costume consisting of a grass skirt, coconut bra, a flower lei around the neck, and a plastic fruit basket on their head. Embarrassing as it was to appear this way in public, all the participants walked around campus in this costume. In a high choice condition, they were led to believe they could decline in favor of a different task. Insufficient justification. In a low choice situation, they were told that no alternative tasks were available. This is sufficient justification. Okay, I think I'm going to highlight both those sentences. High choice condition, insufficient justification. Low choice condition, sufficient justification. How bad was it? Afterward, all the students were asked to estimate the distance they'd walked from one point to the other, needing to justify their embarrassing antics. Those in high choice condition underestimated how far they walked relative to those in the low choice condition. Apparently, the motivation to reduce dissonance can alter our visual representations of the natural environment. I'm going to highlight that too. Motivation. Okay. Through systematic research, it became evident early on that Festinger's 1957 original theory was not to be the last word. People do change their attitudes to justify attitude discrepant behavior, effort, and difficult decisions. But for dissonance to be aroused, certain specific conditions must be present. Through Joel Cooper and Russell Fazio's 1984 new look at dissonance theory, we now have a pretty good idea of what those conditions are. According to Cooper and Fazio, 4 steps are necessary for both the arousal and reduction of dissonance. Here we go. Steps, steps, steps. The first, the attitude discrepant behavior must produce unwanted negative consequences. highlight. Recall the initial Festinger and Carl-Smith's 1959 study. Not only did participants say something they knew to be false, but they also deceived a fellow student into taking part in a painfully boring experiment. Had these participants lied without causing hardship, they would not have changed their attitudes to justify the action. To borrow an expression from schoolyard basketball, no harm, no foul. In fact, negative consequences can arouse dissonance even when people's actions are consistent with their attitudes, as when college students who wrote against fee hikes were led to believe that their essays had backfired, prompting a university committee to favor an increase. Ooh, that's mean. I'm going to highlight that. In fact, negative consequences can arouse dissonance even when people's actions are consistent with their attitudes. The second necessary step in the process is a feeling of personal responsibility for the unpleasant outcomes of behavior. Yep, highlighting that too. Personal responsibility consists of two factors. The first is freedom of choice. When people believe they have no choice but to act as they do, no dissonance, no attitude change. Had Festinger and Carl-Smith coerced participants into raving about the boring experiment, participants would not have felt the need to further justify what they did by changing their attitudes. But the experimental situation led participants to think that their actions were voluntary and that the choice was theirs. Participants were pressured without realizing it and believed that they did not have to comply with the experimenter's request. For people to feel personally responsible, they must also believe that the potential negative consequences of their actions were foreseeable at the time. There we go. I'm going to highlight that too because that's the second condition. When the outcome could not realistically have been anticipated, there's no dissonance, there's no attitude change. Had Festinger and Carl-Smith's participants lied in private and found out only later that their statements had been tape recorded for subsequent use, again, they would not have felt the need to further justify their behavior. And then the third necessary step in the process of physiological arousal. The third and necessary step in the process is physiological arousal. Okay, so there were 4 steps. And in the second step, there were 2 things that they needed to feel personally responsible. Okay, so now we're on the third, and that's physiological arousal. Got it. Sorry, I needed a minute. It's late. Right from the start, Festinger viewed cognitive dissonance as a state of discomfort and tension that people seek to reduce. Much like hunger, thirst, or other basic drives, research has shown that this emphasis was well placed. In a study by Robert Croyle and Joel Cooper in 1983, participants wrote essays that supported or contradicted their own attitudes. Some were ordered to do so, but others were led to believe that the choice was theirs. During the session, electrodes were attached to each participant's fingertips to record levels of physiological arousal. As predicted by cognitive dissonance theory, those who freely wrote attitude discrepant essays were the most aroused, an observation made by other researchers as well. Okay, I'm going to highlight that one. As predicted, they were most aroused. In fact, participants who wrote attitude discrepant essays in a free choice situation report feeling high levels of discomfort, which subside once they change their attitudes. I'm going to highlight that. report feeling high levels of discomfort, subside when they change their attitudes. All right, and the fourth step is the dissonance process. In the dissonance process, is closely related to the third. It isn't enough to feel generally roused. A person must also make an attribution for that arousal to his or her own behavior. I'll highlight that. Suppose you just lied to a friend, or studied for an exam that was canceled, or made a tough decision that you might soon regret. Suppose further that although you are upset, you believe that your discomfort is caused by some external factor, not by your dissonance-producing behavior. Under these circumstances, will you exhibit attitude change as a symptom of cognitive dissonance? Probably not. When participants were led to attribute their dissonance-related arousal to a drug that they had supposedly taken, to the anticipation of painful electric shocks, or to a pair of prison goggles that they had to wear, attitude change did not occur. They've got a figure. Figure 613. Okay. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Step 4. You need all steps. Got it. Okay. To this day, social psychologists continue to study both the classic and the new look theories of cognitive dissonance. On the one hand, research has shown that attitude-discrepant actions do not always produce dissonance, in part because not everyone cares about being cognitively consistent. Research has shown that not everybody cares about cognitively being consistent. And in part because a change in attitude often seems to require the production of negative consequences. On the other hand, some researchers have found that the dissonance effects can be found in children as young as 6 years old. Others have found that inconsistency can trigger cognitive dissonance even without negative consequences. For example, Eddie Harmon Jones and others in 1996 had people drink a Kool-Aid beverage that was mixed with sugar or vinegar. They either told the participants, so it was a no-choice situation, or they asked them, high choice situation, to state in writing that they liked the beverage, and then toss these notes, which were not needed, into the wastebasket. Afterward, they rated how much they liked the drink. You may have noticed that this experiment parallels the Festinger and Carl Smith study, with one key exception. For participants in the high choice situation who consumed the vinegar and said they liked it, the lie, although it contradicted their true attitudes, it did not cause harm to anyone. Did they experience dissonance to reduce by overrating the vinegar Kool-Aid? Yes. Compared with participants who lied in the no choice situation, those in the high choice situation rated its taste as more pleasant. The lie was harmless, but the feeling of inconsistency still forced a change in attitude. Interesting. Okay. I'm going to highlight that last sentence, but I think this whole thing needs to be reread, so I'm going to put the little thing on it. All right. Okay, guys, we have 5 more pages, but we've gotten to a stopping point, and even though we're only 30 minutes in, and I could easily finish the last 5 pages in 30 minutes. I am beat. It's been a long day. I'm going to read my other half tomorrow. We'll see you guys later. Bye.